clumsiness on my part. It's 5 o'clock. I'm sure you're all tired. I wanted to say that there's something else down at the other end of the hall if you're interested. It's discussion for luxury Porsche car owners. Now, I didn't know there were luxury Porsches and Porsches that weren't luxury. I'm a teacher. I see you must all be teachers or students because no one's left for that one. My topic is international schools, somewhat different from the other ones that have gone before. And I will get into international education as I go through this presentation. But first I'd like to thank Dr. Shin for the invitation. He invited me last year, but we had parent-teacher conferences at my school and I was unable to attend. So I'm glad to take this opportunity this time. You may know Dr. Shin as a leader in design technology. I know him as a parent at my school. He has two very skillful, talented students at our school, skillful in the classroom, but also on the basketball court and the volleyball court and the soccer field. And both children have been a treat to have at the school, and Dr. Shin and his wife have been a treat to have as parents. Schools often, and teachers often, and principals often do not get thank yous. Dr. Shin has always said thank you, which I say thank you. I currently work at a school called Boston International School, which is in Wuxi. Now, why a school in Wuxi would be called Boston, I can't answer that question. But it's a new school, at least the campus is new. And it's founded on the back of really a well-established international school in Wuxi called the Taihu International School. In August, Taihu moved to Boston and brought along with it the teachers, the Taihu teachers, the Taihu students, and the Taihu programs, but lost the name. So we are now Boston International School. Is another example of what is an interesting trend in international education these days. It's a private, Taihu was a private, parent-owned, small international school, a not-for-profit school, and Boston is a large, or at least the campus is large, for-profit school owned by a Chinese entrepreneur. There are these things that I'd like to cover in my presentation today. First of all, what are international schools? Secondly, where do they come from? The current situation, where are they now? And what is the promise of international school? Why would you bother to send your children, why would you bother to work at an international school? So first of all, the definition, what are they? The definition that defines the Boston International School and indeed define the Taihu International School is this, that if it is a school's mission to deliver an international education through a curriculum like the International Baccalaureate and to produce global citizens, it is an international school. There are 3 points here that are important. First of all, an international education. International schools do not teach a national curriculum, a national program. They teach an international program. And they do so with international curricula, like the International Baccalaureate. The International Baccalaureate, which I'll explain later on, is not the only international curriculum, but it is the one that is probably most highly regarded as an international school curriculum. And part of the International Baccalaureate, part of the mission of an international school, is to instill in its students a sense of the need for them to participate in global affairs and global events, not just in their own national or local community. And so this is a very important part of an international school, and it is one that defines an international school, if indeed the school is an international school. So, the characteristics of international schools. First of all, students who attend an international school can transfer to other international schools around the world. This is particularly important for someone like me, who has children at school, and who's an international educator, and one who moves around. It's particularly important for business people and diplomatic people and people who work for NGOs when they move around the world. They can take their child from Wuxi and take that child to Singapore, to schools in Europe, to schools in Africa, to schools in the Middle East, to schools in North America that offer the same program. So a child who leaves grade 3 in Wuxi and enrolls in grade 4 in Singapore, or in London, or in New York, will have the same program. Because the international programs allow students to transfer from one international school to another. International schools tend to have a moving population. In other words, students come and go, depending on the length of their parents' contracts in a particular location. They tend to be multinational. Schools tend to have a number of nationalities represented in the school population. Our school has 25 or 30 different nationalities represented. And the student body tends to be multilingual. Students come to international schools speaking a variety of languages. And whereas the instruction in the classroom may be English, the conversations on the playground may be Korean, or they may be Mandarin, or they may be other languages. International schools have an international curriculum, and there are two that are used most. One is the IB, or the International Baccalaureate, and the other is the Cambridge International Programs. You'll find that schools in China and schools elsewhere will have either the International Baccalaureate or the Cambridge International Programs, usually. International schools are accredited by international organizations. The Council of International Schools is or CIS is an accrediting body, as is the Western Association of Schools and Colleges and the New England Association of Schools and Colleges. The Boston International School, the Taipei International School is accredited by CIS in Boston. International schools tend to have a transient and multinational teacher population. Teachers move around. There's a pool of international educators who move around the world from one international school to the other, usually staying at an international school for 2 or 3 years. Teachers move about. The enrollment in international schools tends to be non-selective. Students who speak English or who don't speak English are enrolled. Students who are strong students and students who are weaker students are enrolled. The idea is to provide a place, a learning community, a learning environment for the children of people who need it when they move outside their home country. And so the enrollment tends to be non-selective. Students of varying abilities and varying language capabilities are enrolled in international schools. And usually international schools are English medium instruction, or bilingual. Now, where did international schools come from? It may be the perception that international schools are somebody's idea as a means for making money. That's not the case. International schools are a part of the international school movement, which is something that has been going on for some time, to accommodate people who are overseas, away from their home countries, in terms of the education that they require for their children. International schools have as their precursors overseas schools, which are national schools that are operating outside the home country for the purpose of instructing children from a particular home country. For example, the first overseas school was a school called the Mazzaro English Medium Preparatory School. And it was founded in 1890, and it's still going. Its purpose was to offer an education for the British administration, traders and missionaries in Lesotho land, which is now called Lesotho and is a country in southern Africa. There are still other national schools overseas. Many of these are, In evidence here in China, there are Korean schools, French schools, and Russian schools. And they teach the Russian curriculum to Russian students. They teach the Korean curriculum to Korean students. They're not designed for students who are, in fact, international students. Now, international schools themselves can trace their origin back to 1924. In 1924, the International School of Geneva was founded, and it was established by parents who brought to Geneva and brought to the need for education for them not just one nationality, one language, and one curriculum expectation. Rather, they brought a diversity of languages and cultures. And the founding parents of the International School of Geneva were those who worked for the League of Nations. And these parents wanted more than an education for their children. They wanted one that was consistent with the mission of their organization, which was a rounded view of the world, desire for peace, an understanding of international cultures, international culture, and people who are different. And this really was the foundation of not only international schools, but also the international curricula that were to follow. Now, international schools developed, particularly in the 1950s onwards, as the number of expatriates, the number of diplomats, the number of corporate expatriates increased, and they required an education for their children. The schools from 1950 to about the turn of this century, tended to be parent-owned and small, and governed by parents, not businesses not owned by a particular individual. They were linked by international organizations like the Council of International Schools and the International Baccalaureate, and also by the population of international educators that taught at these schools. The international schools at this time were consistent in that they met international standards of operation and student achievement. These schools would be accredited by international organizations and would offer international curriculum like the IB and Cambridge. Now, as 1924 was a period of time when it would seem to me that parents, people were interested in movements away from the war that had just been experienced and teaching principles of peace and understanding to children in schools. The same is true of the period that led up to 1968. Now, 1968, for those of you who may remember, and I don't see evidence that there are many of you who may remember in the audience, but it was probably the worst non-war year in the 20th century. The war in Vietnam was raging. There were student protests in Europe and in North America. The Prague Spring was crushed by Soviet troops and their invasion. And there were political assassinations, particularly in the United States. But also, at this time, the progressive trend in education was peaking. It was a trend away from traditional education and introduced such things as student choice, transdisciplinary studies, the whole child and child-centered education, and multi-level evaluation. Now, anybody who has a child in an international school has heard these terms delivered to them in parent-teacher meetings or in presentations by the administration. These terms are still current in international education. And the thought behind the progressive trend in education was illustrated by the work of A.S. Neal, Jean Piaget, and Jerome Bruner. a Scot, a Swiss, and an American, all psychologists, were very important theoretical leaders and empirical leaders in the development of the progressive movement in education and also international schools. Now in 1968, also as a promise, was the registration of the IB diploma program in Geneva. This is the first time that an international curriculum designed for international students was actually developed. And it's interesting. It was developed not by some curriculum developer, not by a business, not by a consortium of people who thought it would be a good idea to have a nice program that would attract money to their schools, but rather it was developed in the classrooms, in the staff rooms, at the conference table, by educators, by teachers in these schools, by administrators in these schools, and by board members in these schools. In fact, a leading figure in the development of the IB International Baccalaureate was the chair of the board of the International School of Geneva. So in 1968, the International Baccalaureate, one of the most important curricula that is offered in international schools, was registered and examinations took place. The mission of this curriculum, and the mission still applies to international baccalaureate schools, was to develop inquiring, knowledgeable, and caring young people who help create a better and more peaceful world through intercultural understanding and respect. Okay, so that takes, I've covered quickly in 17 minutes. 17? No, less than 17 minutes now. Where international schools come from and their development through the last century until the turn of the century. Now, the current situation is quite different and there are quite dramatic changes in international schools. Where are they now? Well, in the 21st century, there has been a rapid growth in the number of international schools around the world. The reason primarily is that restrictions on enrollment of host country nationals in international schools have been lifted. And more children who live in the country that the school is operating are now permitted to go to international schools. And that's changed things a lot. It's resulted in many more, and you can see that the increase in the number of schools has resulted in an increase in revenue from these schools. The statistics I have here are from 2011 to 2018, but you can see that the fee revenue from, the total fee revenue for international schools in 2011 was 27 billion US dollars. This year it's 48 billion US dollars. It's just in 7 years. The number of teachers at these schools has almost doubled as well, from 270,000 to 480. And there are many more students now. 5 million students attend international schools around the world, whereas in 2011 there were only 2.8 million. The country with the largest number of international schools is China, followed by the United Arab Emirates, India, and Pakistan. And anyone who is an international educator will know that if you're looking for a job, you're probably going to be looking for a job in international schools in China or in the Emirates. That's where the jobs are. Things are changing fast here, as they are in the United Arab Emirates and other places in Asia. So it's a growing concern, it's a growing interest, it's a growing business, is international education. Now, I guess the question would be, well, why would you bother? What is the big deal about international education besides it's someplace to send your child so that they can go, when they go back to Canada, they can go back to school and not have lost ground? Well, there seem to be 3 reasons why people I see choose international schools. One is because the instruction is in English, and many people want their children to acquire English. It seems to be the language of choice with parents in terms of the education the educational system that they want their children to participate in. Secondly, international schools, and particularly their curricula, are internationally respected. That means that if your child is studying an international baccalaureate program, people know what it is. And if your child happens to graduate from an international school with the International Baccalaureate diploma, it's very highly regarded by universities. It's probably the best international credential for a university application. So the second thing is, besides learning English, is you get a fine education which will ultimately lead you or your child to university acceptance. And third is the sense of the instilling of international values in the students. It's probably the least important, but at least for parents. But it's extremely important for teachers and for the school itself. Instilling things like global citizenship, world peace, environment, and sustainability in the students that go to the schools. Now, as I said, there are two curricula that schools usually offer. One is the International Baccalaureate. And the International Baccalaureate has three programs, one for primary school, one for middle school, and one for high school. And then Cambridge, which also has three programs, one for primary years, one for lower secondary or middle school, one for upper secondary, and then one for advanced secondary. Really the choice is up to the school and the mission of the school. Both are fine programs. The International Baccalaureate is probably better known. And I want to speak a little bit about the International Baccalaureate to finish this off. The mission of the International Baccalaureate, again, it's one of the two main international curricula that international schools offer, is, as you can see, to develop inquiring, knowledgeable, and caring young people. Much like the mission of the IB Diploma Program that started in 1968. The IB Diploma Program is the top 2 years of an International Baccalaureate program. Caring young people who help create a better and more peaceful world through intercultural understanding and respect. And this is articulated in the teaching and learning at the school. International Baccalaureate programs, be it the primary years program, the middle years program, or the diploma program, have a two-part teaching and learning experience for the children. One is a rigorous academic program. That's part of the International Baccalaureate program. But the other part is the instilling of values of international mindedness and global education. The academic program. Now this is the academic program for the International Baccalaureate diploma program, grades 11 and 12. But this is the design. And all students who do the International Baccalaureate diploma program must choose subjects from 6 groups that are offered. All students must choose a language A, which is a first language, and it involves the study of language and literature. And they must choose a second language, which is the study of just a language. There's no literature involved. But all students who study the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program and receive an International Baccalaureate Diploma must have 2 languages. They also choose an individuals in society subject, that's history, geography, business and management, psychology, or something like that. They choose an experimental science, which is biology, chemistry, physics, and what else I got here? Design technology is also considered an experimental science. Psychology can be considered an experimental science as well. A group 5 subject, a math subject, and then group 6. Group 6 is the option. Students can choose an art subject like visual art or music, or they can choose another language, another group 3 subject, or another science. This allows the IB diploma program to cater to students' interests in post-secondary education. A student who is interested in an engineering or a science program would choose science in group 6, whereas a student who is interested in more a liberal arts program would choose a second language or perhaps a second individuals and societies. Diploma students also have to write a 4,000-word essay study a course which links different kinds of knowledge together, called Theory of Knowledge, and participate in community action and service projects. The international values that are instilled in students in the IB programs, not just the diploma program, but the MYP, which is middle school, and the PYP, which is primary, are these. Schools regularly encourage students to demonstrate what's referred to as the characteristics of an IB learner, and there are these: inquirers, knowledgeable, thinkers, down to balance, and reflective. These are very important characteristics that are constantly reminded, are part of the curriculum, and students are acknowledged for demonstrating these features in the learner profile. The specific learning objectives, which are specific, in other words, there is some effort in the classroom to teach these and to measure them, are these below. Understanding language and culture, more than one language. Students have to have 2 languages in the IB programs. Reflecting on one's own perspective and also the perspective of others. Understanding that it's okay to have your point of view, but it's okay for somebody else to have their point of view. Appreciating various beliefs, values, and experiences and ways of knowing. There's a lot of effort to celebrate and acknowledge different cultures and allow students at an IB school to experience different cultures. And also students in the school, as part of community service, address some of the challenges that are facing us all. And students are beginning to engage in global issues in school. And then the goal is to develop or to graduate students who exhibit international mindedness in a global context, students who are multilingual, or at least are able to function in 2 languages, and have an intercultural understanding, and are prepared for global engagement, not just to be members of their community, but also to be members of the world as a whole, and to engage in the solution of problems that face us all. Okay, I see I've got 2 minutes left. I want to conclude by just offering you sort of a somewhat of a personal perspective. I've been in this international education now for about 30 years. And when I was in university and beginning my career, sort of the mantra of my generation was give peace a chance. Our goal, my generation's goal, was to have a more peaceful world as a result of our contribution to it. And many of my friends, many of my schoolmates, many of my people I worked with and went to university with, got into education for that reason. We wanted to make a change. We wanted to make a change for the better because of the experiences we had in 1968, for example, and other years in our growing up. And we still saw, however, that nations were choosing war and that kind of conflict to solve problems. We still saw, and we still see injustice and hunger and health concerns and limited education for some in the world. And these are still issues that international educators like me and international students like the ones I work with are concerned about. This is still all with us. And for someone who's had this with him for quite a long time, I can some days be quite discouraged. Our efforts to give peace a chance have failed. But have they? But have they? Around the world, there are 4,871 international schools. The reference here you can check. In 2017, there were 160,000 students who graduated from IB schools. with two attributes. One, a fine academic education, and also desire to become engaged in the world's problems and seek a more peaceful, more tolerant world. And those 160,000 students join 1.7 million graduates of international schools, since international schools were around. So maybe, as I consider the issue of my struggles as a student at the end of the last century and my concern that I wanted to make a difference, I wanted to give peace a chance. Maybe there are people who feel the same way, and maybe peace has a chance. Thank you.